The first snow of the season was threatening when Eli Mackey found the man sitting on the old logging road behind his house. Not falling yet, but close. The sky that particular shade of gray that meant business, the kind of cold that got into your bones and stayed there. Eli was 8 years old and hadn't spoken a word in 18 months. The doctors called it selective mutism. Trauma response, they said. Perfectly normal for a child who'd lost his father the way Eli had. The cave-in at the Northfield mine. The 3 days of waiting, the funeral with the closed casket because there wasn't enough left to look at. His mother called it grief. His teachers called it concerning. Eli didn't call it anything because Eli didn't call anything anything anymore. But he still listened, still watched, still noticed things that other people missed, like the man on the logging road. He was big, not fat, just large, the way some men got when they'd spent their lives doing work that required shoulders and hands. His motorcycle was parked beside him, a weathered Harley with saddlebags that had seen better decades. He sat on a fallen log with his head in his hands, his leather cut dark with road grime, a patch on the back that read Iron Ridge MC above a pickaxe and a mountain. Eli watched from behind the birch trees for a long time. The man didn't move, didn't look up, just sat there like he was waiting for something that wasn't coming. Eli looked at the lunchbox in his hand. Peanut butter and honey, the way his dad used to make it. His mom had started making them that way after the funeral, even though she always forgot to cut off the crusts. Eli ate them anyway. It was the only thing that still tasted like before. He walked out from behind the birches. The man's head came up fast, alert, wary, the way Eli's dad used to look when he heard a strange sound in the mine. But when he saw Eli, something in his face softened. "Hey there, kid." His voice was rough, like gravel and smoke. "You lost?" Eli shook his head. "This your property?" A nod. "Sorry, I didn't mean to trespass. Just needed to rest a minute." The man started to stand, then stopped, his hand pressing against his side. "I'll get out of your way." Eli looked at the man's face, at the lines around his eyes, the hollows in his cheeks, the way his hands were shaking slightly, not from cold, from something else. He walked forward and held out the lunchbox. The man stared at it. "What's this?" Eli opened the lid, showed him the sandwich inside. Peanut butter and honey cut diagonal, the crusts still on. "Kid, I can't take your lunch." Eli pushed the box closer. "Doesn't your mom need you to eat?" Eli shook his head, pushed the box closer still. The man looked at the sandwich, then at Eli, then at the sky that was getting grayer by the minute. Something moved across his face. Hunger, yes, but something else too. Something that looked like the way Eli felt when he woke up in the middle of the night, and forgot, just for a second, that his dad wasn't coming home. "You sure?" Eli nodded. The man took the sandwich, ate it slowly, like he was trying to make it last, like he'd forgotten what food tasted like and was remembering all over again. When he finished, he closed the lunchbox and handed it back. "Thank you," he said. His voice was different now, softer. "That's the first thing I've eaten in 2 days." Eli tilted his head, a question without words. "Long story. Got my wallet lifted in Green Bay. Been riding on fumes ever since, trying to get home." The man looked at his bike, then back at Eli. "Name's Dutch. What's yours?" Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out the small notepad he carried everywhere. He wrote in careful letters and held it up. "Eli. Eli." Dutch said it like he was testing the weight of it. "Good name. Strong name." He paused. "You don't talk much, do you?" Eli shook his head. "That's okay. I've known a lot of men who talked too much and said nothing. Sometimes quiet is better." Dutch stood, slower this time, his hand still pressed against his side. "I should get going. Try to make it to Marquette before the storm hits." Eli wrote again. "You're hurt." Dutch looked at the notepad, then at his own hand against his ribs. "It's nothing. Took a spill a few days back. Road was slick. You should stay." "Can't, kid. I've got—" Dutch stopped, looked at the sky, at the road, at the small house visible through the trees. "I've got somewhere I need to be." Eli wrote one more time, the letters larger now, pressing hard with the pencil. "My mom makes soup. You could have some before you go." Dutch was quiet for a long moment. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow, and somewhere in the distance a crow called out, harsh and lonely, the sound of winter coming whether anyone was ready or not. "Your mom know you're out here inviting strangers to dinner?" Eli almost smiled. It was the closest he'd come in 18 months. He turned and started walking toward the house, not looking back to see if Dutch was following. He didn't need to look. He could hear the footsteps behind him, heavy and hesitant, the walk of a man who'd forgotten what it felt like to be invited somewhere. Sarah Mackey was in the kitchen when Eli came through the back door, her hands in dishwater, her face carrying the particular exhaustion of a woman working 2 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night. She looked up when she heard the door, started to smile at her son, and then froze when she saw the man standing behind him. Eli. Her voice was careful. "Who's this?" Eli held up his notepad. "Dutch. He's hungry. I gave him my sandwich, but he needs more." Sarah's eyes moved from the notepad to Dutch, taking in the leather cut, the road-worn face, the way he held himself like he was expecting to be turned away. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to intrude. Your boy—" Dutch stopped, started again. "He's got a kind heart. I told him I couldn't stay, but he insisted." Sarah looked at her son, at the notepad in his hand, covered in words he wouldn't say out loud, at the expression on his face, not quite a smile, but closer than she'd seen in 18 months. "Soup's on the stove," she said finally. "There's enough for 3. She turned back to the dishes, and Eli led Dutch to the kitchen table, and outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier, covering the logging road and the motorcycle and all the miles between here and wherever Dutch had been trying to go. He wasn't going anywhere tonight, and by tomorrow morning, neither was anyone else. The storm hit hard around midnight, not the gentle snow of early winter, but a full nor'easter, the kind that buried cars and closed highways and reminded people that the Upper Peninsula wasn't a place, it was a negotiation with nature. By morning, 18 inches had fallen, and more was coming. Dutch woke on the couch to the smell of coffee and the sound of a boy who didn't speak, trying not to make noise. He opened his eyes to find Eli sitting cross-legged on the floor, a mug of hot chocolate in his hands, watching him with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and caution. "Morning," Dutch said, his voice rough with sleep. Eli held up his notepad. "Mom says you can stay until the road's clear. She's making breakfast." "That's kind of her." Dutch sat up slowly, wincing at the pull in his ribs. The spill had been worse than he'd admitted. 2 cracked ribs, probably, maybe 3. He'd ridden through worse. But that was before the diagnosis, before the 6 months he'd spent pretending nothing was wrong. He looked around the room while Eli watched. A small house, well kept, but showing the signs of deferred maintenance that came with tight budgets. A photograph on the mantel, a man in work clothes, hard hat under his arm, grinning at the camera with the particular pride of someone who worked with his hands. Sarah, younger and lighter, leaning against his shoulder. Eli, maybe 4 years old, sitting on the man's shoulders with his hands in his hair. "Your dad?" Dutch asked. Eli nodded. His face did something complicated, grief and love and something else, something that looked like guilt. "He was a miner?" Another nod. Eli wrote, "Northfield Mine. He died 18 months ago. Cave-in." Dutch was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the photograph again, at the man's hands, broad and scarred, the hands of someone who'd spent his life underground, at the company logo on the hard hat, at the smile that didn't know what was coming. "I'm sorry, Eli. I lost people to the mines, too." He paused. "That's why I ride. The Iron Ridge MC. We're mostly ex-miners, widows, families who lost someone. We look out for each other." Eli's pencil moved. "Like a family?" "Yeah, like a family." Dutch thought about the brothers he'd left behind in Marquette, the ones who'd been waiting for him for 3 days now. He'd missed the chapter meeting, missed the vote on the new outreach program, missed telling them the thing he'd been putting off for 6 months. Sometimes families are the people you choose, not just the people you're born to. Sarah appeared in the doorway, a dish towel over her shoulder, her face carrying the same exhaustion it had worn the night before. "Breakfast ready. Eli, go wash your hands." Eli went. Dutch stood carefully, followed Sarah into the kitchen. The table was set for 3, pancakes stacked on a plate in the center, a pot of coffee steaming beside them. It was more food than Dutch had seen in days, more care than he'd felt in months. "Ma'am, I want to thank you for everything. I know this isn't—" "You can stop calling me ma'am. Makes me feel like my mother-in-law." Sarah poured coffee, handed him a mug. "It's Sarah, and you don't need to thank me. Eli wanted you here, and that's—" She stopped, set down the coffee pot. "That's the first time he's wanted anything since his father died. He doesn't talk. Not since the funeral. Not a word. The doctors say it's trauma, that it'll pass, but—" Sarah sat down heavily, like the weight of 18 months had finally caught up with her. "I don't know how to reach him. I work 2 jobs, I'm barely keeping the lights on, and every time I look at him, I see his father's eyes, and I just—" She pressed her hands against her face. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this. Sometimes talking to a stranger is easier than talking to anyone else." Dutch sat across from her. "The Iron Ridge. We run support groups for mining families. Grief counseling, financial help, that kind of thing. If you ever need—" "We don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's community." Dutch took a sip of his coffee, choosing his words carefully. "Your husband? The mine pay out his death benefits?" Sarah's face tightened. "They're supposed to. The company's been processing the claim for 18 months. Every time I call, there's a new form, a new delay, a new excuse." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Meanwhile, I'm 2 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank is sending letters. Merry Christmas, right?" "Which bank?" "First Northern. There's a man, Gerald Kessler, who keeps calling. Says he's trying to help, but his kind of help comes with deadlines and fine print." Sarah shook her head. "I've got until January 15th to catch up on payments, or they start foreclosure proceedings. That's 6 weeks away, and I don't have 6 weeks of money." Dutch thought about the stack of bills he'd seen on the kitchen counter the night before, the red final notice stamps, the envelope from the mortgage company sitting unopened on top. He thought about his own accounts, the money he'd been saving for medical bills he might not live long enough to need. "How much do you owe?" "It doesn't matter. I'll figure it out. I always do." "How much, Sarah?" She met his eyes, and he saw the pride warring with desperation, the same look he'd seen on 100 faces in mining towns across the Upper Peninsula, people who'd rather drown than admit they needed a hand. $4,000, plus fees, plus whatever else they decide to tack on. She stood, started clearing plates that no one had used yet. "I'm picking up extra shifts at the diner, and there's a night job at the gas station that might come through. I'll make it work." Eli appeared in the doorway, his hands still damp from washing. He looked at his mother's face, at the tension in her shoulders, and Dutch saw the boy make a decision, saw him swallow whatever he'd been about to write and tuck the notepad back in his pocket. The kid was protecting her, staying silent, because silence was easier than adding to her burden. Dutch recognized that particular kind of love. It was the same kind that had kept him from telling his brothers about the cancer, the same kind that made you carry your weight alone, even when you didn't have the strength. "Storm's supposed to clear by tomorrow afternoon," Sarah said, her voice bright and false. "You should be able to get back on the road then." "Actually, I was thinking I might stick around a bit longer, if that's okay." Dutch looked at Eli, saw the flicker of something in the boy's eyes. "My ribs could use another day of rest, and I'd like to help out while I'm here. Fix that porch railing I noticed last night. Maybe take a look at your furnace. It's been making a noise." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Dutch stood, carried his mug to the sink. "My wife used to say that the universe puts you where you need to be, even if you don't know why yet." "I think maybe she was right." Sarah stared at him. "Your wife?" "Passed 3 years ago. Cancer." Dutch looked out the window at the snow still falling, covering everything in white. "I've been riding ever since, trying to outrun something that can't be outrun." He turned back to face her. "But maybe it's time to stop running and start being useful again." The phone rang before Sarah could respond. She answered it, listened for a moment, and her face went pale. Yes, I understand. No, She closed her eyes. "Thank you for calling." She hung up and stood there, her hand still on the receiver, her whole body rigid. "Sarah? That was Gerald Kessler, from the bank." Her voice was flat, hollow. "He moved up the deadline, says there's a buyer interested in the property, and if I can't make the full payment by December 20th, they're starting proceedings immediately." She looked at the calendar on the wall. December 15th today. "That's 5 days. I have 5 days to come up with $4,000. Eli's notepad appeared. "Mom?" Sarah looked at her son, and Dutch saw the moment she decided to lie, to protect him the way he'd been protecting her. "It's fine, baby. Everything's going to be fine." But her eyes told a different story, and Dutch, watching from the kitchen doorway, made a decision of his own. He pulled out his phone. No signal. The storm had knocked out the tower, but as soon as the roads cleared, he had calls to make. The Iron Ridge MC took care of their own. And as of last night, the Mackeys had become their own, whether they knew it or not. He just had to figure out how to make Sarah accept help she was too proud to ask for, and he had 5 days to do it. The storm broke on the morning of December 17th, leaving behind a world wrapped in white and a silence so deep it felt sacred. Dutch borrowed Sarah's truck while she was at work and drove to the gas station on Route 41, the only place in 20 miles with reliable cell service. He made 6 calls in 40 minutes. The first was to Mac, his vice president in Marquette. "I need the emergency fund, all of it, and I need you to start making calls." "How much are we talking?" $4,000 minimum. More if we can get it. A miner's widow is about to lose her house, and she's got a kid who needs her. Mac didn't ask questions. That was the thing about the Iron Ridge. When one of them said someone needed help, the others showed up. No paperwork, no bureaucracy, just boots on the ground and hands in pockets. "I can have 20 riders in Northfield by Friday morning," Mac said. "Maybe more if I reach out to the Copper Country chapter." "Do it. And Mac," Dutch paused, watching his breath fog in the cold truck cab. "There's something else I need to tell you, something I should have told you 6 months ago." "What's that?" Dutch looked at the photograph he'd been carrying in his wallet since September. The scan, black and white, the mass in his lung, circled in red by a doctor who'd spoken in percentages and timelines. He'd told no one, had ridden away from the diagnosis the same way he'd ridden away from everything else, his grief, his brothers, his life. "It can wait," he said finally. "Let's get through this first." The second call was to Father Tom at St. Michael's in Marquette, who ran the Mining Family Support Fund. The third was to a lawyer named Ellen Brightwater, who'd spent 20 years fighting for workers' comp claims against companies that didn't want to pay. The fourth was to a reporter at the Mining Gazette, who'd been documenting the Northfield Mine's pattern of delaying death benefits. The fifth call was to a number he'd memorized but never dialed, the direct line for Gerald Kessler at First Northern Bank. "Mr. Kessler, my name is Thomas Vandermeer. I'm calling about the Mackey property on County Road 12. Are you the buyer's representative?" Kessler's voice was smooth, professional, the voice of a man who'd learned to foreclose on families without losing sleep. "No. I'm calling to ask why you moved up the deadline on a widow with a child 3 days before Christmas." The line went quiet. When Kessler spoke again, the smoothness had an edge to it. "I'm not at liberty to discuss client accounts with third parties." "Then let me tell you what I know. Sarah Mackey's husband died in the Northfield cave-in 18 months ago. The mining company has been stalling her death benefits the entire time. She's working 2 jobs to keep her son in that house, and you just cut her deadline in half because you've got a buyer who wants the property." Dutch kept his voice steady. "That buyer wouldn't happen to be connected to Northfield Mining, would it? Looking to quietly acquire the homes of families they've already destroyed?" The silence stretched longer this time. "I don't know what you're implying, Mr. Vandermeer, but I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that in 3 days, there's going to be a lot of attention on this story. Media attention, legal attention, the kind of attention that makes banks look very bad right before the holidays." Dutch paused. "You might want to reconsider that deadline." He hung up before Kessler could respond. The 6th call was the hardest. Ellen Brightwater answered on the second ring. "Dutch, Max said you might be calling. What do you need?" "Everything you've got on Northfield Mining's death benefit claims. Specifically Sarah Mackey, widow of Michael Mackey, deceased March of last year." "I've got plenty. That company's been stonewalling every claim from the cave-in. 8 families still waiting on benefits they're legally owed." Ellen's voice hardened. "I've been building a case, but I need plaintiffs willing to go on record. Most of them are too scared, worried the company will find ways to make their lives even harder. What if I could get you a plaintiff? Then I could file a class action before New Year's, force the company to pay what they owe, or face a very public trial." Dutch thought about Sarah, her pride, her exhaustion, her determination to handle everything alone. Asking her to be the face of a lawsuit was asking her to fight in public, to admit she needed help, to become a symbol instead of just a woman trying to keep her family together. "Let me talk to her," he said. "I'll call you back." He drove back to the house to find Sarah's truck already in the driveway. She'd gotten off early. The front door was open despite the cold, and he could hear voices inside. Her voice, sharp with something that sounded like anger, had no right to go behind my back. And Dutch walked in to find Sarah standing in the kitchen, her coat still on, a piece of paper clutched in her hand. Eli sat at the table, his notepad in front of him, his face pale. "Sarah, what happened?" She turned on him, and he saw that her eyes were bright with tears she was refusing to let fall. "Mrs. Patterson from the diner called. Said she got a call from someone asking about my situation, asking how much I owed, whether I had family, whether I'd accept help from strangers." Sarah held up the paper, a printout of something, text too small to read from across the room. "Then I got home and found this in my mailbox, a flyer. Help save the Mackey home, with my address on it, my son's name." Dutch felt the ground shift beneath him. Mac must have started spreading the word faster than expected. The flyer was supposed to come later, after Dutch had talked to Sarah, after she'd agreed. "I didn't authorize that," he said. "I was going to talk to you first." "But you did make calls. You did tell people about my finances, my mortgage, my—" Sarah's voice cracked. "I trusted you. I let you into my home, and you went behind my back and turned my family into a charity case. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a stranger decided he knew better than me how to run my life." She threw the flyer on the table. "I don't need saving, Dutch. I need to be left alone to figure this out myself. You have 5 days, Sarah. 5 days, and then you and Eli lose this house. You can't figure that out alone. Nobody could. Watch me." She walked past him toward the stairs, her shoulders rigid. Dutch started to follow, but a small hand caught his sleeve. "Eli." The boy was holding up his notepad, the words written in large, careful letters. "She's scared. That's why she's angry. Don't give up." Dutch looked at the boy, this 8-year-old who hadn't spoken in 18 months, who'd been carrying his own grief in silence, who somehow understood things that adults couldn't see. "I won't," Dutch said. "I promise." Eli nodded. Then he wrote something else, something that made Dutch's breath catch in his chest. "My dad used to say that pride was just fear wearing a suit. He said real strength was asking for help when you needed it. Your dad sounds like a wise man." He was. Eli paused, his pencil hovering. Then he added, "You remind me of him." Dutch felt something crack open inside him, something he'd been holding together with willpower and distance for 3 years. He thought about Maggie, about the diagnosis he'd been running from, about all the help he'd refused to accept, because accepting meant admitting he was weak. "Eli, can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone else?" The boy nodded. "I'm sick. The same thing that took my wife. I found out 6 months ago, and I've been writing ever since, trying to outrun it." Dutch's voice was rough. "But you can't outrun something that's already inside you. I know that now." Eli's face went through something complicated. Then he reached out and took Dutch's hand, the first deliberate touch he'd initiated since his father's funeral. They stood like that for a long moment, the winter light falling through the windows, the house silent around them. Then Eli picked up his notepad and wrote one more line. "Then stay. Help us. Let us help you." Dutch looked at the words, at the boy who'd written them, at the stairs where Sarah had disappeared, carrying her fear and her pride and her desperate love for a son she didn't know how to reach. "Okay," he said, "I'll stay." That night, after Sarah had retreated to her room and the house had gone quiet, Dutch sat at the kitchen table with his phone and made one more call. "Mac, change of plans. I need everyone here by tomorrow night, not Friday. And I need them to come quiet. No flyers, no announcements, just show up. That's fast. Roads are barely clear." "I know. But this family needs to see something before they'll believe it. They need to see that they're not alone." Dutch looked at the photograph on the mantel, Michael Mackey grinning at the camera, his son on his shoulders, his wife beside him. "And Mac, when you get here, there's something I need to tell you, something about why I've been gone so long. Whatever it is, brother, we'll handle it together." "I know." Dutch's voice was quiet. "That's what I'm finally starting to understand." He hung up and sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the wind outside, waiting for the sound of engines that would come with the dawn. They'd come whether Sarah wanted them or not, and when she saw them, when she understood that she wasn't just a charity case, but a family that other families were willing to fight for, maybe then she'd be ready to fight too. Maybe then she'd let someone catch her. Dutch just had to hold on long enough to make it happen. The sound came at dawn on December 18th, a low rumble that built slowly, like thunder rolling across the frozen fields. Sarah heard it first, sitting up in bed, her heart pounding before her mind caught up. She went to the window and looked out at the road that led to her house. Motorcycles, dozens of them, their headlights cutting through the gray morning light, chrome gleaming with frost. They came in formation, 2 by 2, filling the road from the tree line to the horizon. She was downstairs and out the front door before she realized she was still in her pajamas, her feet bare on the frozen porch. Eli appeared beside her, his notepad clutched to his chest, his eyes wide with something that looked like wonder. Dutch stood in the yard, his breath fogging in the cold, watching the riders approach. He turned when he heard the door, and his face held an expression Sarah couldn't read. Hope, maybe, or fear, or some complicated mixture of both. "I told you," he said. "The Iron Ridge takes care of their own." The first bike pulled into the driveway. The rider was a big man, nearly as big as Dutch, with a gray beard and kind eyes. He killed his engine and dismounted, pulling off his helmet to reveal a face weathered by years of work and wind. "Mac." Dutch clasped his hand. "You made good time. Roads weren't as bad as they said, plus we had motivation." Mac looked past Dutch to Sarah, standing barefoot on the porch with her son beside her. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but when Dutch called, we couldn't stay away." "I don't understand." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask for this." "No, ma'am, you didn't, but your boy did." Sarah looked at Eli, at the notepad in his hands, the words he'd written, visible even from here. They came. "He wrote to Dutch last night," Mac continued. "Asked him to bring his family. Not to give you money, he knew you wouldn't take that, just to show you that you're not alone." He reached into his cut and pulled out an envelope. "This is from the Iron Ridge Emergency Fund, $1,500, and this—" He pulled out a second envelope, thicker than the first. "This is from Father Tom's support fund at St. Michael's, another 1,000, and this—" A third envelope. "This is from the Copper Country chapter, the Lake Superior Riders, and about 40 other people who heard your story and wanted to help." Sarah stared at the envelopes. "I can't—" "You can." Mac's voice was gentle but firm. "Your husband was a miner, Mrs. Mackey. He spent his life underground so other people could have heat and light. He died doing that work, and the company that killed him has been stalling your benefits for 18 months. He pressed the envelopes into her hands. "This isn't charity. This is what we owe you, what the whole damn industry owes you." The other riders had dismounted now, forming a loose semicircle around the yard. Sarah counted them without meaning to. 30, 40, maybe more. Men and women, old and young, all wearing cuts with different patches, but the same expression. The look of people who'd shown up because showing up was what you did. "How much?" she asked. Her voice cracked on the word. $4,200 total, enough to cover the mortgage and then some. Mac paused. "But there's something else, something that could help a lot more families than just yours." Dutch stepped forward. "Sarah, this is Ellen Brightwater." He gestured to a woman who'd ridden in with the second wave, mid-50s, sharp eyes, wearing a leather jacket over a business suit. "She's a lawyer. She's been building a case against Northfield Mining for months." Ellen approached the porch, her boots crunching on the frozen grass. "Mrs. Mackey, the mining company owes death benefits to 8 families from the cave-in. They've been delaying every single claim, hoping people will give up or run out of money to fight. I can file a class action lawsuit that forces them to pay what they owe, but I need a lead plaintiff, someone willing to go on record and tell their story." Sarah's face went pale. "You want me to sue the mining company?" "I want you to hold them accountable. There's a difference." Ellen's voice softened. "I know it's scary. I know you've been trying to keep your head down and survive. But if you do this, if you stand up and say, 'This isn't right,' you won't just be helping yourself. You'll be helping every family they've wronged." The yard was silent, except for the ticking of cooling engines and the distant cry of a crow. Sarah looked at the envelopes in her hands, at the riders filling her yard, at her son standing beside her with his notepad pressed to his chest. "Eli," her voice was barely audible, What do you think I should do? Eli looked at her for a long moment. Then he lifted his notepad and wrote, his pencil moving slowly, deliberately, the letters larger than any he'd written before. Dad would want you to fight. Sarah read the words, read them again, and something shifted in her face, the fear giving way to something harder, something fiercer. Okay, she said, I'll do it. A murmur went through the crowd. Ellen stepped forward to shake Sarah's hand, already talking about timelines and depositions and the pressure they could bring to bear. But Sarah wasn't listening. She was looking at Dutch, who stood apart from the others, his hand pressed against his side, his face gray with something that wasn't just cold. Dutch. She walked toward him. Are you all right? I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. She could see it now, the way he held himself, the shadows under his eyes, the careful way he breathed. Just tired. Long few days. You're lying. Dutch looked at her, and for a moment the mask slipped. She saw the pain beneath it, the exhaustion, the thing he'd been carrying alone for too long. Yeah, he said quietly. I am. Mac had noticed too. He crossed the yard in 3 strides, his face tight with concern. Dutch, what's going on? Dutch looked at his vice president, his brother, the man who'd ridden 100 miles through snow to help a stranger because Dutch had asked him to. He thought about all the times he'd kept his distance, all the calls he hadn't returned, all the help he'd refused to accept. I'm sick, Mac. Cancer. Same as Maggie. The words came out rough, unpracticed. Found out in June. Been writing ever since, trying to... He stopped, shook his head, trying to outrun it, trying to die alone so nobody had to watch. The silence that followed was heavy with shock and grief and something else, something that looked like love. You goddamn fool! Mac's voice was thick. You think we'd let you go through that alone? You think that's what brothers do? I didn't want to be a burden. You're not a burden. You're family. Mac grabbed Dutch's shoulder, pulled him into a rough embrace. Whatever happens, we go through it together. That's the code. That's what we promised each other 40 years ago. Dutch held on, let himself be held, and for the first time in 6 months, he felt something loosen in his chest, the knot of fear and isolation that had been choking him since the diagnosis. I'm sorry, he said. I should have told you. Yeah, you should have, but you're telling us now. Mac pulled back, his eyes wet but his voice steady. And now we're going to get you to a doctor, and we're going to figure out what comes next. Together. A small hand tugged at Dutch's sleeve. He looked down to find Eli holding up his notepad. See? Real strength is asking for help. Dutch laughed, a rough, broken sound that was half sob. You're a smart kid, you know that? Eli almost smiled. Then he wrote one more line. I know. My dad told me. The morning. Biapis unfolded in waves of activity and purpose. Ellen sat up at the kitchen table with Sarah, walking through the lawsuit while the writers unloaded supplies from their saddlebags, groceries, firewood, a new furnace filter someone had thought to bring. Mac made calls to doctors in Marquette, setting up appointments, arranging transportation. The women from the Copper Country chapter started cooking, filling the house with the smell of food and the sound of voices. By noon, the yard was full of motorcycles and the house was full of people, and Sarah stood in the middle of it all, with tears streaming down her face and a smile she couldn't suppress. I don't know how to thank you, she said to Dutch, who'd finally let someone wrap his ribs and force him to sit down. I don't know how to... You don't have to thank us. Dutch's voice was tired but peaceful. You just have to let us help. That's all any of us can do. Let someone else carry the weight for a while. The phone rang. Sarah answered it, listened for a moment, and her face went through something complicated. That was Gerald Kessler, she said, from the bank. He heard about the lawsuit, said he's withdrawing the accelerated deadline and offering to work out a payment plan. She paused. He also said he's sorry, that he didn't know the full story. And now he does. Dutch looked at the room full of people, the writers, the lawyers, the families who'd shown up, because that's what you did when someone was drowning. Now everyone does. That evening, as the sun set over the snow-covered fields and the riders prepared to leave, Eli did something no one expected. He walked to the center of the yard, where Dutch stood saying goodbye to Mac and the others. He tugged on Dutch's sleeve, and when Dutch looked down, Eli opened his mouth. Thank you. 2 words, the first he'd spoken in 18 months. Sarah made a sound, half gasp, half sob. She dropped to her knees beside her son, pulling him into an embrace that shook with all the grief and hope she'd been carrying since the mine took her husband. "Eli, baby, you talked. I had something to say." Eli's voice was rusty, uncertain, like a door opening for the first time in years. He looked at Dutch over his mother's shoulder. "My dad would have liked you." Dutch felt the tears sliding down his cheeks and didn't try to stop them. "I would have liked him too." The riders mounted up, engines rumbling to life in the fading light. Mac clasped Dutch's hand one final time. "You're riding with us to Marquette. No arguments." "No arguments." Dutch looked back at the house, at Sarah standing on the porch with Eli beside her, both of them waving. "But I'll be back. I promised." "You keep that promise, brother. You've got people waiting for you now." Dutch mounted his bike, the familiar weight settling beneath him. He raised a hand to the family on the porch, the woman who'd let a stranger into her home, the boy who'd shared his lunch and found his voice. Then the convoy pulled out, engines roaring, heading north toward Marquette and doctors and whatever came next. Behind them, the Mackey house glowed with light against the winter dark. And in front of them, the road stretched on, uncertain, difficult, but no longer empty, no longer alone. The first snow of the following season found Eli Mackey in the same spot where everything had started, the old logging road behind his house, the birch trees bare against the gray November sky. But this year, he wasn't alone. Dutch sat on the fallen log, thinner than he'd been a year ago, but steadier, the chemo finally behind him. The doctors in Marquette had caught it early enough, they said. Early enough to fight. Early enough to win, maybe, if winning was the right word for a war that never really ended. He'd moved into the small apartment above Sarah's garage in March, after the 3rd round of treatment had left him too weak to ride. Sarah had insisted, and Eli had written it in his notepad before he'd found his voice again. "Stay. We need you. You need us." He'd stayed, and slowly, carefully, they'd built something that felt like family. "You're quiet today," Dutch said. Eli smiled, a real smile, the kind that had been impossible 18 months ago. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About last year, about the sandwich." Eli kicked at the snow beneath his boots. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I just walked past, if I'd been too scared to stop." "But you weren't." "No, I wasn't." Eli looked at Dutch, his 9-year-old face carrying something that was older than his years, but no longer broken by it. "My therapist says that's called a turning point, a moment when everything could have gone one way but went another instead." Dutch nodded. He'd had his own therapist now. Mac had insisted on that too, after the diagnosis, after everything. Twice a week he sat in a small office in Marquette and talked about Maggie, about the cancer, about the years he'd spent running from grief instead of through it. It helped, not all at once, not like magic, but slowly, the way ice melted in spring. "Your mom's making lunch," Dutch said. "She sent me out here to get you." "I know. I saw her in the window." Eli stood, brushed snow from his jeans. "Dutch, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you going to be okay?" It was the question Dutch had been avoiding for months, the question everyone wanted to ask but was afraid to. He looked at the boy who'd shared his lunch with a stranger, who'd found his voice in a yard full of motorcycles, who'd taught him that asking for help wasn't weakness, but strength. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The doctors say the scans look good, but with this thing, you never really know. You just take it one day at a time." Eli nodded, processing this the way he processed everything, carefully, thoroughly. "That's what my dad used to say, about the mines. He said you couldn't think about all the days at once, just the one. You were in. Your dad was a wise man. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." They walked back to the house together, their boots crunching on the fresh snow. The Mackey house looked different now, the porch railing fixed, the roof patched, a new coat of paint that the Iron Ridge had applied in one long weekend last spring. It looked like a home that people were taking care of, a home that had been worth fighting for. Sarah met them at the door, her face flushed from the kitchen, her eyes bright with something that had been missing for 2 years. The lawsuit against Northfield Mining had settled in September. Not everything Ellen Brightwater had wanted, but enough. enough to pay off the mortgage, enough to set up college funds for the 8 children who'd lost fathers in the cave-in, enough to make the company finally acknowledge what it had done. Gerald Kessler had sent a letter after the settlement, handwritten on his personal stationery. He'd apologized for the accelerated deadline, explained that he'd been under pressure from buyers he hadn't fully understood. He'd resigned from First Northern in February and was now working for a credit union that specialized in helping families avoid foreclosure. The system was still broken. Dutch knew that, but sometimes, if you pushed hard enough, pieces of it could be mended. "Soup's ready," Sarah said, "and there's pie for after if anyone's interested." "I'm always interested in pie." Dutch followed her inside, Eli trailing behind. The kitchen was warm with cooking and filled with the smell of something that reminded him of Maggie's kitchen, of the home they'd built together before the cancer had taken her. He didn't run from the memory anymore. He let it wash over him, let it hurt the way it needed to, and then let it pass. That was the thing about grief, he'd learned. You didn't outrun it, you didn't outlast it. You just learned to carry it differently, to make room for it alongside the joy that kept coming, whether you expected it or not. They ate lunch at the kitchen table, the same table where Dutch had sat that first night, exhausted and hungry and lost. Eli talked about school, about the friends he'd made since finding his voice again, about the book report he was writing on a story about a boy who found a lost dog. Sarah talked about her job at the new coffee shop in town, the one that had opened after the mining company's settlement money started flowing through the community. And Dutch listened, watched, let himself be present in a way he hadn't been present anywhere in years. After lunch, Eli went to his room to work on homework, and Sarah and Dutch sat on the porch with mugs of coffee, watching the snow fall over the logging road. "The Iron Ridge is doing another ride this weekend," Dutch said. "Memorial run for the cave-in anniversary. Mac wants me to lead it." "Can you ride that far?" "Doc says yes, as long as I take breaks." He looked at her. "I was thinking maybe you and Eli could come. Ride in the truck if you want, or—" "We'll ride." Sarah's voice was firm. "Eli's been asking about getting on a bike. Says he wants to learn when he's old enough." Dutch smiled. His dad would have liked that. His dad would have liked a lot of things. Sarah's eyes were wet, but she was smiling too. "He would have liked you, Dutch. He would have been glad you found us." "I didn't find you. Eli found me." Dutch looked out at the logging road, at the spot where a hungry stranger had sat on a fallen log and been offered a peanut butter sandwich by a boy who didn't speak. "He saw something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." The snow kept falling soft and steady, covering the world in white. Inside the house, Eli's voice drifted down from his room, singing of all things, some song he'd learned at school, slightly off-key but full of life. Dutch listened to the sound and felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, exactly. Peace was too simple a word for the complicated tangle of grief and gratitude and hope that lived inside him now. But something close, something worth carrying. He took a sip of his coffee and watched the snow fall, and for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't thinking about the road ahead or the road behind. He was just here, present, home. The boy's voice floated through the window, singing about morning and sunshine and all the things that came after the dark. Dutch closed his eyes and let it wash over him. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss one. And tell us, when has a small act of kindness changed your whole direction?